This is Rabbi Sachs. Welcome to the Chai Academy, coming to you from the Chai Center. So, as often as we can, we get together to talk about various topics of Jewish interest, if you will. And this has been going on now for 8 months, 9 months. I guess one of the fringe benefits of COVID is this became a necessity. So we have been discussing hey Susan, shalom shalom. We have been discussing the modern state of Israel and how it came about, and some interesting history behind it. So what have we've discussed until now essentially is that in 1917 the Balfour Declaration, written by the author was Lord Arthur Balfour, and it was signed by the British government. Hey Deborah, shalom shalom. It was signed by the British government that they are behind having a Jewish state in Palestine, the Roman area called Palestine. And that was a tremendous thing. And Lord Balfour was a truly had a good friendship with the first president of Israel, Mr. Weizmann, or Dr. Weizmann, I think he is. But unfortunately, in 1939, as the war was heating up, the Brits committed an act of treason. That's the way it's viewed by most Jews. And they came up with the white paper. The white paper was that Britain has no interest in having a Jewish state in Palestine. So it was a complete 180 from the Balfour Declaration. And it was basically sending a message to Hitler that, we don't really care about the Jews, and if they're stuck in Europe, they're stuck in Europe, and go get them, Tiger. And as much as Churchill tried to overturn this white paper, he was unable to, and the white paper forged ahead. Obviously, the Jews all over the world were outraged in Britain, and we're none too pleased, but because the war broke out and Britain got involved in the war, so the various Jewish sects and factions of people fighting for an independent state in Palestine stopped warring against Britain. They figured Britain needs all the help they can. So Gurion, who basically led the Hagana movement. Was basically all these movements were there to assure that the Jews could live in Palestine threat free. Some were more radical than others, and some used extreme measures. So Ben-Gurion, he stopped warring against the British. He says we have something more important to do, and that's to defeat Hitler. The Irgun, which was more of a military, less political, more military, which was founded by Zev Jabotinsky, so they also stopped warring against Britain, and they helped Britain in their war efforts. In fact, one of the leaders of the Irgun, David Raziel, was killed in 1941 in an Iraq mission for Britain. The other faction was Lekhi. Now, Lekhi were considered freedom fighters, and Lekhi was probably the most radical. And as we discussed, it was led by the poet Abraham Stern, and they were fighting basically Britain even during the war in Palestine. They weren't necessarily fighting the war outside of Palestine, but they were fighting in Palestine. And and as we said last week, is that they they killed Jews as well in their effort. They held up a bank in Tel Aviv, and 2 Jewish tellers were killed. So and so the Lekhi fighters, they would not stop fighting the Brits, and during the war. Now, the war is drawing to a close, and it's almost certain that Hitler's going to be defeated, right? There's no way he could win this war. So now the Irgun started to fight against Britain once more. They didn't fight British civilians. They didn't fight Arab civilians. Their target was to get the Brits out of Palestine. They viewed the British as a major obstacle to allowing Jews to emigrate, which they were, and allowing Jews to get out of Europe. And they pretty much they viewed the Brits as their enemy. So and it was very, very tough times. So the British Army, the British Army fought back, and the British Army, when they caught members of the Irgun, they had public floggings, to which the Irgun responded by public floggings of British soldiers. The flogging stopped soon thereafter because it was such humiliation to see a British officer get flogged by a freedom fighter, a domestic terrorist, if you will. And in 1947, the Brits killed 7 Jews, and shortly thereafter they got hold of 3 Irgun members, and they said they're going to kill them. They're going to hang them. Irgun said, if you hang them, we're going to hang yours. People tried to intervene to stop the Brits from hanging the Irgun members, these Jewish freedom fighters. The Brits wouldn't hear of it, so the Brits hung these 3 Irgun members, and in turn, Irgun killed 2 British soldiers. And Irgun, which was led by Menachem Begin, Irgun were the ones that bombed the King David Hotel. That's what the British Army and British officers had taken over a certain wing, couple of floors in the King David Hotel. The Irgun called up and said, "We're going to bomb. You should evacuate." They felt it was it was malarkey. It was a phony call, and they did not evacuate. 90 British soldiers or officers, or 90 people anyway, were killed by the King David at the King David bombing. Now, that was the Irgun. Hagana, once the war was over, which was led by Ben Gurion, they weren't against the British at all. Hagana was more against Arab terror. That's what they were fighting against. They wanted to make some type of political deal with Britain, and they felt if they worked with the British, they could make this happen. And part of it was true, because there was this British officer by his last name was Wingate, and he really helped the Jews with some intel as far as the Arabs go, etc. Wingate was summarily, when it was found out that he told over some of the Arab plottings, he was removed from Palestine and sent back to England. The goal of Hagana and Irgun ultimately was to bring Jews into Palestine. So they had, and by the way, there was a certain time where Hagana warriors or Hagana officers worked with the British together to fight to fight wars to protect the British, etc. There's a story of Hagana. They flew during the war. They flew parachutists over into Nazi-occupied Europe, and many of them were caught. One of them was the famous poet Hannah Senesh, and you can Google her. She was a poet, and there was a lot of controversy over her. But she was a female parachuter, and they were caught, but they were there on behalf of the British. The elite soldiers were called Palmach. By the way, if you ever heard the term Palmach, that was the elite of the British soldiers. After the war was over, despite the British barricade, which the white paper only allowed 15,000 Jews per year for 5 years, and even that they didn't give out visas. They gave out less than that. So there was only over 5 years, like 51,000 certificates or visas were issued. So after the war, the goal was to smuggle in as many Jews as they could, and that was sometimes Hagana, Irgun, and Lekhi together, right? They in total 90,000 Jews were smuggled in to Palestine, which was the precursor to the state of Israel. You may have read that the Hagana, the Lekhi, and the Irgun, they blew up train stations and they blew up bridges, just as strategic ways of getting this done and assuring that the Jews could come in. Now, when independence happened in 1948, basically pretty much Hagana was changed its names to Tzahal, which is basically the Tzaba, Hagana, Lomi, right? Which was the national army of Israel. So Ben Gurion, and he became the first prime minister. He was considered the George Washington of Israel, and the Brits left, and he even though Ben Gurion was advised not to call it a state, but the day the Brits left, the day the UN said, okay, we're going to partition, Ben Gurion, who was a stubborn man, he declared it a state. He was told, if you declare it a state, there's going to be a war. And he says, I don't care. He says, we can't rest anymore. We cannot wait anymore. You know, how many more lives are we going to lose? Let's set up a state. Let's set up the law of return, that any Jew is welcome at any time to Israel, and you will not be turned away. So that was called the law of return, and he declared it a state. There was the War of Independence, where 1% of the Jewish population was killed. Ben Gurion, it was his way or the highway, and he despised the Irgun. He felt they were fascists. He felt they were terrorists, and he felt that they were just political hardliners, and he actually sought. He was Menachem Begin, who was a member of the Irgun, the leader of the Irgun, was David Ben Gurion's arch enemy. Ben Gurion had put out a wanted, dead or alive, Menachem Begin, because he hated him so much. And in fact, Menachem Begin, the way he avoided detection from the Brits, from Ben Gurion, was to dress up as a chassid and live in Mea Sharim, and change his name to, I think his name was Yitzchak Halperin or something like that. And he had payas, and at night, so he used to walk around, go to shul, etc. But at night, he used to have this illicit radio show, talking about how we're going to fight Ben Gurion, we're going to fight the Brits, we're going to fight the Arabs. And he was Menachem Begin was a passionate Jew, as Ben Gurion was. They were both passionate warriors. Ben Gurion, not only did he hate Menachem Begin, Ben Gurion hated anybody that disagreed with him, and he felt it was treasonous to go against his policies. So Ben Gurion, he hated Levi Eshkol. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol hated him. He came to hate Golda Meir, because they had different thoughts and policies, and they went in a different direction. And Ben Gurion, who was close to them, they were close friends, hated them because of their political views. So Ben Gurion was a tough old man. Ben Gurion, by the way, I don't know if you know, he was born in Poland, and his name was David Green. That was his name, David Green. And in 1906, he came to Palestine, and which was under the Ottoman Empire. He studied law in Turkey, and basically he was kicked out of Turkey. So he married a woman, Paula, I think. I don't remember her name, Paula, and he moved to Palestine. Ben Gurion politically was a socialist, and he founded the Labour Party. What's interesting is that and by the way, the country of Israel was founded on socialist ideas, right? Think of the kibbutzim. Think of even now they have it's socialist. Everybody's drafted to the army. Everybody has health insurance. Everybody has to carry with them ID, Todazot, right? And they are very it was founded under socialist ideals, so it's a democracy with a socialist background. So the Labour Socialist Party was in charge, and here's a twist of fate. The Labour Socialist Party was in charge of the government until 1977. So from 48, right, 48 to 77, when Begin, the arch enemy, became prime minister. Begin represented the Conservative Party. They were in charge. They were in charge until 1977. That's a heck of a long time for Israel. If you think about Israel's politics now, they collapse the government and they have to have new elections, and sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. So Ben Gurion was a secular Jew, but not necessarily as secular as you may think. He wasn't religious. However, he did have a tremendous respect for the Bible. He used to read the Bible. He used to read the prophets. He used to read the ketuvim, the writings, the stories, and he used to read it, and he used to enjoy reading it. So that was one of his favorite pastimes. He also learned how to read Greek because he wanted to read Aristotle and Plato in the original. He was also way ahead of his time, is that he used to practice yoga. There are plenty of pictures of him with standing on his head as he practiced yoga. So this is before yoga basically was popular. He got himself into trouble is because he made a comment as prime minister. He says, I've been reading the Bible, and in the Bible it says that 600,000 men came out of Egypt with Moses. I believe that there were way less. He nearly brought down the government because the Mizrahi party says if you don't retract that, Mizrahi is the Orthodox party at the time, the only Orthodox party. They said if you don't retract what you just said, that you don't believe the Bible, will collapse the government. So he had to retract and say, okay, I retract. Anyway, he was, during the war of, during the war, I think, of independence, he was both the prime minister. Yeah, and that's true. What Renee says, that he one of the things that he was famous for was building up the Negev, building up the south. He, in fact, when he retired, resigned as prime minister, he moved to the Negev and he set up a lot of places. He made the Negev the south because it was all Jerusalem and north. Um, but he set up the south. So during the war, he was both minister of defense and prime minister. So he wore both caps, right? Which is so unusual. But he was credited with winning wars. He was credited with founding the Tzahal. He was credited with growing Israel by the beginning. Where there were 500,000 Jews. That's with the immigration to over 2 million, right? Now they say there's 6.5 million, right? That's what they say, right? And he was very fond of saying that. He was very tough. And by the way, he people respected him because he was so passionate. They saw him as not so much as a religious, but someone who would stick up for the Jewish people because of the Jewish people, not necessarily because of being religious. So he had this wild hair, white hair, right? Which Einstein also had this wild. I don't know what it was about their wild hair. Einstein had more hair than Ben Gurion, but still he had wild hair. And but he was fond of saying, it doesn't matter what the Gentiles say, it matters what the Jews do. So during the War of Independence, once again, he was the Prime Minister and he was the Minister of Defense. And it's very interesting guy. Now, even though Begin and Ben Gurion hated each other, by the 6-Day War, Begin rode down to the Negev, rode down to the south. He went to the residence of Ben Gurion and he says, David, we need you to become prime minister if we're going to win this war. So Begin asked him to become prime minister again. Ben Gurion says, Ani ben shmonim, I am over 80 years old, and I am tired, and he declined. But Begin had the humility to ask him to take the reins. And by the way, Begin, who we'll talk about, who was basically, he was considered Britain's most wanted in foreign territory, was Menachem Begin. When he became prime minister, he actually came to England. So the very people who wanted to kill him actually had to guard him when he arrived, and he had a police escort, and he met the prime minister, and he met other queen, etc. And when this guy was public enemy number one, it was just interesting how things, politics make strange bedfellows, right? That's what they say. Interesting thing about Ben Gurion is when the 6-Day War was won, and they went to Ben Gurion for advice, he said, do not keep what you just got. He said, keep Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is our city, and keep the Golan, because Golan is strategically, if you lose the Golan, you're not safe. He said, but everything else, he says, if you truly want peace with the Arabs, then you should give them back. And so he was opposed to keeping Judea and Samaria. But of course, he wasn't listened to, because Judea and Samaria is where Jewish history was. Right? Jerusalem is part of the West Bank. I need you to understand that. Jerusalem is part of what they call the West Bank. So they'll make outwardly they'll make a compromise. So we'll take East Jerusalem. You have West Jerusalem, and the Jerusalem will be the center of Jerusalem will be a united city. Truth be told, they want Jews out of Jerusalem. They want Jews out of Golan, and I think there's proof of the pudding. is that, there's so many times in Jerusalem itself, in West Jerusalem itself, where there's these car rammings. Or if you remember last year, some guy took a tractor and did tractor rammings. That's not in Judea and Samaria. That in Jerusalem proper. So we have to. But Ben Gurion didn't want it. Ben Gurion said that you should give it back, but only give parts of it back. That wouldn't have washed either. And so the others in government decided we're going to keep it, because once you've got it, right? So the argument was as follows: nowhere in history is where you get attacked, and you get attacked by a number of countries, and you win, and you manage to gain land. Never do you give it back. Where in history have they given back the land that you've won? So they've annexed due to a war, right? Israel didn't start the war. The war was started by Egypt and by Syria and by Jordan, right? They came and attacked Israel. Israel wasn't looking for it, right? Israel kind of knew it was going to happen, as opposed to Yom Kippur War. Heads were in the sand. But the 6-Day War, they knew it was going to. They knew it was going to happen, and all they did was defend themselves. And during the defense, they managed to gain some land. So somebody writes here, Susan writes, it's a law under UN that if you gain territory by war, you can annex it. So but Ben Gurion said that this will just wars will continue forever and ever and ever. So they didn't listen to Ben Gurion. Was Ben Gurion right? So I think we have to fast forward. We have to fast forward to 2006, when Ariel Sharon gave up Gaza. It was a unilateral move. He says, we've been fighting you in Gaza, and there's 8,000 Jews in Gaza. We're going to remove them because we want peace. Right? So he says, okay, so Arabs of Gaza, the PA, right, Palestinian Authority, we want peace, so we're going to remove. So they moved every single Jew. Gaza became a Judenrein state. There were no Jews in there. They were rewarded by their efforts, by their unilateral withdrawal. They weren't forced out. They said, we're just going to move out. Right? That's one less border we'll have to fight with. They were rewarded 1 year later. The Gazans dropped Palestinian Authority, and they voted for Hamas, which in the UN itself, forget Israel, forget America, in the UN, Hamas is a terrorist organization. So the people of Gaza, they're Judenrein, no Jews, and they thought that they would get better, become better, and Hamas, duped them also by saying, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that. But that was the reward. The reward was that Hamas, a terrorist organization, became the political party in charge of Gaza. And the rest of the story. They've shot thousands upon thousands of rockets and missiles and Katushkas and from Gaza into Israel. And there was Operation Cast Lead, which Israel was denounced because it went in. It says, we got to stop the rockets. We got to stop the tunnels. So if Israel would have gotten out, as Ben Gurion suggested, there's no proof that there would have been peace. No proof whatsoever. And if you think about it, the Palestinian Liberation, PLO, right? They were founded in 1964. 3.5 years before the 6-Day War. What were they liberating? The UN gave Israel and they gave the Arabs, right? So the Arabs didn't want it, but it was liberation. This was international law that they were given, but yet there was no peace. There was no peace. So I personally believe in Gurion. Hope was optimistic, but I believe Ben Gurion would have been proven wrong. We'll talk about the personalities. We're also going to talk about the what's the name of the ship, Atalina, I think it's called. We have a lot to cover. All right, God bless. Please feel free to share, and we'll resume, please God, tomorrow.